Hi, everyone, and welcome to this MRS On Demand webinar, How to Land a Faculty Position from Application to Interview. This is part one of a three-part series. Today we're going to focus on the academic market in Europe, and parts two and part three will deal with the academic market in the United States and the academic market for primarily undergraduate institutions, respectively. My name is Bob Brockler. I'm the Digital Media Manager at the Materials Research Society. Our moderator today, Katherine Mazzio, is a scientist at Helmholtz-Zentrum Berlin. Her research focuses on the design and synthesis of hybrid materials for energy conversion and storage applications, which she has been pursuing at Helmholtz-Zentrum Berlin since 2015. She is currently an active member of the Early Career Professionals Subcommittee of the MRS. That committee is responsible for creating this week's webinar series. Katherine, I will turn this webinar over to you.
Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to the MRS webinar series, How to Land a Faculty Position from Application to Interview. Over the course of this webinar series, we hope that you will have the opportunity to learn about the faculty application process in some different regions within Europe and what makes for an outstanding application package. This webinar series was organized by the MRS Early Career Professionals Subcommittee, and I'm Katherine Mazzio, and I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. So first, I'd like to just give a quick overview of the format for today. I'll start with introductions to our main speaker, Eva Unger, followed by some short introductions to our panelists, Miguel Rodriguez and Sarah Haig. We'll then hear a presentation from Eva, followed by further discussion from Miguel and Sarah, who will contrast some of the regional variations in the faculty application process within Europe. So this is important because, as you'll see, the process can be rather different depending on which country you are targeting. After that, we'll open up the floor to the audience for a Q&A session with our speaker and panelists. And please remember that you can ask a question at any time through the Q&A function of the Zoom platform. Now my thing is not working. Here we go. So now to introduce our speaker and panelists. Our main speaker today is Eva Unger. She is an associate senior lecturer in chemical physics at Lund University in Sweden, as well as a young investigator group leader at Helmholtz-Zentrum Berlin, where she heads the young investigator group Hybrid Materials Formation and Scaling. This is a BMBF-funded young investigator group that was started in 2017 and focuses on scalable deposition methods and gaining in-depth understanding of film formation processes for high-quality semiconductors, such as metal halide perovskites. Miguel Rodriguez, one of our first panelists that I'll introduce, is a full professor in the Condensed Matter Physics Department at the University of Valladolid in Spain, where he has been since 1999. His work focuses on cellular materials, in particular related to polymers and foams. He co-founded the Cellular Materials Laboratory in 1999, and since 2012 has also been the CEO of CellMat Technologies, which is a spin-off company originating from his laboratory. Our second panelist is Sarah Haig, who is a professor of materials characterization at the University of Manchester in the UK, where she has been since 2010. Prior to working at the University of Manchester, she worked in industry as a consultant applications specialist at JEOL. Her research interests center on improving our understanding of nanomaterials properties using transmission electron microscope imaging and analysis techniques. So we'll hear more from each of our panelists after the main talk, but for now, I'll give the floor over to Eva to introduce us to the academic market in Europe.
All right, so I'll start sharing my screen. And then we pre-recorded a brief video that will give you some general information.
Hi, my name is Eva Unger, and I'll be kicking off this MRS webinar series on how to land a faculty position from application to interview, on a reflection of the academic market or the academic job market in Europe. I'll be especially focusing on Sweden and Germany because these are the two European countries where I have first-hand experience of especially the entry-level type of academic positions that you might be applying for right after your first or second postdoc. So I'm currently an assistant senior lecturer at Lund University, Sweden, and a young investigator group leader at Helmholtz-Zentrum Berlin. Preparing for this presentation, I came across a webpage from the European University Institute, where special information of the academic system and careers in different European countries can be found. So by, for instance, clicking on Sweden, you would be directed to a page with then more special information regarding the Swedish academic or higher education system, requirements for positions, or even aspects like job security and contracts and duties would be summarized. To understand what kind of positions or academic positions in other countries might be interesting for you, it's usually good to first take a look at the academics career steps in this particular countries and how you would actually then advance your career within that academic system. After a postdoctoral position, which in Sweden is limited to actually 2 years, you might want to obtain an entry-level positions like the assistant senior lecturer position. So this is called the biträdande universitetslektor in Sweden. You should be applying for this within 5 years of completing your PhD. The position is about 4 to 6 years, and it's definitely a meriting type of position similar to an American tenure track. Within this time, most people also acquire the so-called docent title, which entitles you to teach at a Swedish university. And these positions are often, or they always openly announced when created, but it can actually be some cases where the positions are created in response to an internal candidate that has sufficient funding to fund their own research. So the employment category has been subject to changes, and there has been differences actually also between universities. There's still in many places in the United States. And then again, based on merits, you might be promoted to a professor, which is similar to a full professor position in the United States. These more senior positions are often reached through promotions, and therefore there is not many of those type of positions announced. In any case, I would always recommend to, when a position that is of interest to you is announced, to actually check with the responsible person or the responsible HR department what the conditions are for applying. The higher education system in Sweden is essentially consisting of 14 universities and 22 higher education institutions. So junior faculty positions can or are in some cases created by the university. And there are possibilities to also obtain a pure teaching position, which is called adjunct, but they are in the natural science quite rare. And junior faculty positions are often created based on someone who is already in the system or who can already fund themselves. So speaking of funding, there are a variety of grants in the Swedish funding system that really provide some very good and very reasonable funding for entry-level type of positions. So the Swedish Research Council, Vetenskapsrådet, has the so-called starting grant. There is the agency Formus that has a program called Future Research Leaders. The research, the junior research grants by Future Research Leaders, also by the Swedish Foundation for Strategic Research, and the Wallenberg Foundation has a program called the Wallenberg Academy Fellow. When transitioning to, for instance, Sweden from abroad, there might also sometimes be special calls, like, for instance, an international career grant that Vetenskapsrådet had announced a couple of years back, or the kind of European type of funding like Marie Skłodowska Career Actions or ERC starting grants. In Sweden, there's an interesting grant also from the Swedish Foundation starting grants, which you can apply for if you've been positively evaluated by ERC, so meaning you've gotten high grades, but your project wasn't funded. So summarizing the pros and cons, as I see it in Swedish academia, there are actually many funding opportunities for young researchers to get kind of funding on the level that would fund your position and sometimes half or a full PhD student. But also the manifold availability of this kind of funding maybe keeps or contributes to what you could call a postdoc bottleneck, where you see that there's actually many people being stuck in kind of an intermediate postdoctoral position. And it's quite common that there are people in postdocs or researcher positions for 6 to 7 years before maybe then taking an actual step into an academic tenure track type of position in Sweden. Promotion from kind of a assistant senior lecturer to a senior lecturer position and later on professor is the rule. That has led to actually quite dramatic increase in the amount of permanently employed senior lecturers and professors in the Swedish academic system. And so you might actually find departments where you have a lot of seniors, a lot of professors, but then on the other hand, very, very few PhD students. Sweden is very family friendly and most people find it very easy to establish a good work-life balance. At the same time, I'd say, as in many countries, there's also this leaky pipeline syndrome, where especially when you look at the number of women researchers, the numbers decrease within the academic hierarchy. So there's the lowest proportion or much lower proportion of women among professors, while in junior lecturer or junior position, they actually make up more than 50% on average. Swedish academia is very international, and you will also manage fine with only speaking English in your daily life. And from personal experience, I'd say I had great benefit from being fluent in Swedish when I started my kind of second postdoc when I came back to Sweden, because it enabled me to immediately participate in undergraduate teaching and enabled me also to build my teaching portfolio. In the German academic system, there are essentially 3 different career pathways available for younger researchers. What is still fairly common is the former German system of having people do a so-called habilitation, which means you would be an associated researcher in an existing research group, work alongside an existing professor on your own topics, and then after about 3 to 6 years, submit another thesis that then in 2002, the junior professor was established as a new career path at German universities in particular. This system, though, has not been adapted everywhere. Normally, a junior professor position would be for 3 to 6 years, and sometimes, not always, come with a tenure track. And then the third option would be junior group leader, and this is a junior position that's very common, especially at research centers, so non-university academic affiliations. This position would also usually be for 3 to 6 years and often comes with a tenure track option. Consecutively, there are 2 different academic positions at German universities. There is a so-called W.D. professor, which is similar to an associate professor position in the USA. And there is a W3 professor, which is a permanent, similar to a full professor position in the United States. You will have or may have the merits to actually apply directly for W2, W3 position, because if you have been in a longer PhD phase and maybe some postdoctoral research afterwards, you may actually have the scientific merits that qualify you for a W2 or W3 professor position. The German academic system is essentially separated into higher education institutions. There are about 100 universities and more than 200 universities of applied sciences, so-called Fachhochschulen. And in addition to that, there are some major non-university research organizations. So this could be, for example, the Fraunhofer Society, the Helmholtz Association, the Max Planck Society, and Leibniz Association, to just name a few. In the German academic system, only universities and university professors can award PhD degrees. To enter these early stage academic positions, at either German universities or non-university research organization, there is a number of different funding schemes available in Germany. So as an example, the German Research Association has a program called Eminente. There is a Kovalevskaya fund from the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation. Prerequisite here is that you have to have been 10 years outside Germany prior to applying. So this means that this particular grant is actually very attractive and interesting, in particular for international people that are interested to transition to Germany for their next academic career step. Then the German Ministry of Research and Education has a program called the Young Investigator Groups. So these are often research groups, more on the level of 3 to 4 people funded by BMBF. And very important for these calls, and you might maybe more often find this type of group at non-university research organizations, because the scope of the calls are often very, very applied. And often the calls also require, or at least it's highly beneficial if you have an involvement of an industrial partner in those kind of projects. To give you an example of what would be actually required for a junior professor position at a German university, requirements are that you will have to have conducted your PhD or started your PhD research less than 6 years ago. You will need an excellent research profile, scientific independence, of course a PhD, a doctoral degree or equivalent. As mentioned, it was introduced in 2002, but it's not fully adopted everywhere. So a good source of information would actually be the page juniorprofessor.org, and there you'll find more information of what these positions encompass, but also what the actual likelihood is to get tenure after such a position. So it's definitely good to read up on it to manage expectations. The larger research organizations often even provide their own funding schemes. So it's not strictly third-party funding, it is more internal funding that you apply for. And these programs are targeting and recruiting new talents to the research center. So as an example, the Helmholtz Young Investigator Groups is a program that focuses on applied research topics. It's typically about 250,000 euro per year, and then funds about 5 years of research, usually has a tenure option. The requirements is that you've completed your PhD between 2 and 6 years ago. You have to be nominated by a Helmholtz Center, so you will need very strong local support of the Helmholtz Center that actually wants to recruit you. And that would be the same for Max Planck and the other programs. And then the usual excellence and scientific independence. Quickly summarizing the pros and cons of German academia, I'd say there's some fairly good funding opportunities for young researchers, in particular if you want to get a kind of young investigator grant or a type of grant that enables you to start up a small team. Funding situation is fairly stable. There are many academic institutions to choose from. So as in also other countries, I'd say it's always important, or it's easier when you have a personal contact network that actually helps you establish yourself. And you will need, definitely for most of applications or most funding you apply for, you'll need strong support from your academic host institution. And what I'd also say, it seems that there's more of a steady number of permanent positions. So that also means positions will only be available actually once an existing professors will retire. When it comes to like German academia in general, I'd say there's a lot of internationalization efforts. You'll be also fine only speaking English professionally when you arrive. I always recommend learning a local language wherever you work. And from the experience, especially of my postdocs, I know that it's not always easy to live in Germany as a foreigner. Ending, I'd like to make a couple of more general remarks that maybe we can discuss in more detail in the panel discussion and also Q&A section. International experience is often considered to be required or beneficial, but that might not always be the case. Internationalization efforts you'll find in all academic research institutions in Europe. Recruitment or landing an academic position often requires very strong local support, and raising third-party funding is sometimes it's expected or required, but it's definitely not going to reduce your chances of actually getting a tenure track or a tenured position. So, and finally, these are some useful links and sources that I partially used in order for the information presented in this talk. I'd like to thank you very much for your interest in joining German or Swedish academia.
Thanks
So
so much.
that was the end. Sorry.
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot, Eva. I think this was a really informative talk. And right now, I'd like to turn it over to our panelists to offer some additional perspective from their experiences in both Spain and the UK. So Miguel, let's start with you, and then we can follow that up with Sarah. So Miguel, you can take the floor.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. I hope you can see my screen now. I will I will speak a few minutes about the academic career in Spain. Well, the steps are not so different to those of Germany, but of course every country in Europe has slightly different system, or in some cases even the system could be totally different. But in the case of Spain and Germany, it's not so different. So basically, the first step is to have some postdoctoral experience. I mean, 1 year could be enough, but 2 years is probably the most common option. After your postdoc, you can try to join Spanish institutions by different ways. The first step is here. In the first step, there are mainly 3 options to join a Spanish scientific position. The first one is what is called Juan de la Cierva positions. This is we typically in Spain use the name of a Spanish scientist to call a typical position or a given position. There are 2 types of Juan de la Cierva positions, what is called phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 is for very young scientists, so directly after the postdoc. Is a 3 years position. There is 1 call per year. It's an open call for any scientists that want to apply. And it's typically very competitive. To have some chances, you need at least 15 papers to have some possibilities. And you need a local contact. I mean, when you apply for a Juan de la Cierva in phase 1 or phase 2, you apply together with a Spanish group in a university or in the Spanish Research Council. So you need a local contact, and the evaluation of the Juan de la Cierva application is, let's say, 50% the quality of the candidate and 50% the quality of the host, the research group you will join. So this is the first option. Currently, every university, we have more than 60 in Spain, public university, opens calls every year. Not many positions in every call, maybe 5 people per university, maybe between 5 and 10. Of course, it depends on the size of the university. And these are very specific calls. Once again, you need a local contact to apply in the university. So, and of course, it's less competitive than the previous one because you are competing with lower number of people. And the third option is an assistant professor position. These are 4-year positions. They are open every year in each university. As you will see later, the number of positions is increasing right now due to the situation of Spain. And some positions are offered every year in every university. But in this particular case, it's very important to have a previous certification given by the Spanish certification agency for university professors. So you need to apply for this ANECA certification. Well, it takes some time to prepare this. It takes some time to receive the result of your evaluation, and you can apply for assistant professor, for associate professor, for full professor. Of course, you need the right merits in your CV to have some possibilities. To have an assistant professor position, you need something like around 15 papers and some previous experience in teaching at university level. But of course, if you are able to enter here, your career in Spain is in good shape, and you will have a lot of possibilities to go to the second and third phase. Well, if you have more experience, I mean, if you have something like 4 years experience, 5 years experience after your PhD, then you are right to apply to go directly from here to here. Also, of course, if you finish your phase 1 Juan de la Cierva, you are ready to apply to the second phase, or even if you have a postdoc position in a Spanish university for 2-3 years, you are ready to apply for the second phase. But of course, you can also apply for the second phase if you have the right merits, the right CV. Then we have here the Juan de la Cierva position phase 2, another 3 years position, open call per year, once again, very competitive. And there is also another kind of positions that are called Ramón y Cajal position. In this case, it's a 5 years. Once again, there is one open call per year. Once again, in this particular case, this is slightly different to the previous one, because here you don't need a local contact. I mean, you apply, and if you are in the top of the evaluation, then you could choose the universities or research centers that have an available position. This is really very good. It's a very good option, but to get this, you need a very high, a lot of merits in your CV. Of course, there are the typical European Union calls that can also be applied or can be also used to become a scientist in Spain, the ERC starting grant or the Marie Curie action. And also, if you have enough CV, you can apply for an associate professor position, which is already permanent. Once again, if you apply for a professor position, you need the certification by ANECA, by the Spanish certification agency. And well, at the end of the day, you are able to obtain enough CV, you could apply for a permanent position as full professor. So here you have more or less what are the different options. Open calls by the Spanish Ministry of Science in blue. Local calls by universities and R&D centers in green, and European Union calls. In order to have a professor position, you will need always a certification that has to be obtained by applying first, and your curriculum will be evaluated. But there is no, let's say, an interview in this process. Is a process that is done by analyzing your CV without any interview in this case or in this case. Also in Juan de la Cierva, Ramón y Cajal, etc., all the evaluations are online, so there is no need for an interview. So in Spain, we have more than 60 public universities and more than 20 private universities and more than 25 units of the Spanish Research Council that are located in different areas of Spain. And here you have the different, let's say, different options to join both the universities using this part here and the Research Council using all this here. For universities, assistant professor and associate professor are specific for universities. So here you have some remarks. well, entering into the Spanish system is very competitive. There are a few positions and the standards are very high. But I think that things will become easier in the coming years because many professors at universities are very close to retirement. For instance, in my department, and this is very common in many universities, the current average age is over 55. So there are professors that have been here for maybe 30 years, and there is a clear need for substitution. So there will be a lot of possibilities to become assistant professor in the next 5 to 10 years. Another point is that currently most of the staff in Spain is from Spain. So most of the campus are national campus, I would say. But it is true that we are looking in Spain for a more international staff. So there are possibilities to join in this system coming from other countries. One important point to know is that salaries here are lower than in other countries, Germany, Sweden, Norway, UK, etc. That is, the difference is clear, but also the standard of life is cheaper, so you can survive and you join one of these centers with the current salaries. Well, I mean, we are still teaching Spanish in many campuses. It's true that we are moving from Spanish to English slightly in many universities, but if you join our system, our Spanish system, I think you should consider learning Spanish. It would be very helpful for you in the university and also in your daily life. And well, here you have some very helpful links to read about Juan de la Cierva positions, Ramon and Cajal positions, etc. And the ANECA evaluation system to apply for a professor position. Well, that is all from my side. Now I think we move to Sarah.
Great, thanks so much, Miguel. Yeah, so I think Sarah can start sharing at this time, and we can learn about the situation in the UK.
Great, so hopefully you can hear me now. Can't see anything
All
that
good.
says. Oh, brilliant, thank you. So I guess the UK system is similar to what Eva talked about to Sweden, more so than to Germany and Spain, in that there isn't any centralized system for applying to be an academic. You apply to the individual universities and they advertise posts depending on where they have a need in the department. For example, if a big professor in polymers retires, then they try to hire people at various stages to fill that gap, or if they can see people in that area are going to retire, they might hire an earlier career person. So that comes through the university level, and I've taken Eva's diagram and modified it a little bit here, so you can see that these first set of squares are the sort of traditional route. So you start out as a postdoc, you take a lectureship position at a university, and then you get promoted to senior lecturer, also called associate professor. So we're currently, different universities are using the name of assistant professor, a bit like the US, or lecturer like the traditional UK, and that seems to be split between universities, but we seem to be happy with it. Then the senior lecturer, associate professor, and then going up to full professors. And at some universities, there's more prestigious full professor positions that are chairs of things and etc. So as an external applicant, you can absolutely apply at all stages of that academic career. So, and very much people are invited to apply as full professors from equivalent type of expertise around the world. Now, running in parallel to those are the postdoctoral fellowships, and we're very fortunate in the UK that there are many organisations that would fund postdoctoral fellowships. That's, for example, the Royal Society. Their research councils also fund postdoctoral fellowships, and depending on the university may offer a guarantee of a permanent position or an expectation of a permanent position, and that's very much something that you negotiate with the university as part of your initial application procedure, and they would then give you a letter that said, if this person is, does their fellowship, we expect to offer them a permanent position at some point when they finish it. So, sorry about that. Okay, so they can be at all levels. So we have not just the postdoctoral fellowships, and you have the senior research fellowships. And as an undergraduate student at a university, you would probably not be aware of which of the people teaching you are postdoctoral fellows or senior research fellows, as opposed to lecturers, senior lecturers, or full professors. The experience when you're actually in that academic role tends to be the balance of research you're expected to do compared to the amount of teaching and administration and other roles, service type roles within the university. So that brings me on to the next slide. So that's looking at then the difference between a traditional academic lectureship type role and one of these sort of research fellowships. And I should just mention that when you're looking at UK universities, there's a lot of UK universities, and some of them are more research focused than others. And that leads to quite a big difference in the expectations of the academics in those roles. So I've heard of everything from an expectation of lecturing for 10 lectures a year to having to do 10 lectures a week. And that can depend on the university that you're in, or even in the department that you might be in. So that's certainly something that you want to explore as part of your application and your investigation process. As a guide, there's something called the Russell Group, who are 24 of the probably older, more established universities. They tend to be more research focused, and you can see a list of those. I think that's similar to the Ivy League, but that's kind of a guess. I've got a little bit more of information about that under here. They certainly are highly competitive, but I would say that if you see a lectureship in your area at somewhere that you'd be interested to move to, then go for it. I was very fortunate in that I applied for my lectureship when I only had half a year of experience after my PhD. And that's unusual, but it's not impossible. It just happened to be a role at a university that I wanted to move to, which was Manchester, and having an interest, which is microscopy, which was my focus. So again, I certainly should say, don't be afraid of applying within your first 2 years of your coming out of PhD if you've got that interest. I'll come back onto that in a second. So the position should be very widely advertised. There's a central site called jobs.ac.uk, and I'd say that it's rare for them to be focused around an internal candidate. Of course, there will be internal candidates, but I think the vast majority of university positions are really being advertised internationally. And about 30% of the academics at UK universities are international. So that is really a big part of the pool of pulling people into lectureships and more senior positions. So on the other side, the research fellowships, these you can apply for straight to the organisation, for example, the Royal Society, Royal Academy of Engineering. However, you would need support from a UK hosting university. So there, I'd say it is really important to have contacts at the university, to talk to them in plenty of time. A lot of the institutions will have an internal deadline by which they need to internally review any applicants for these highly competitive fellowship type roles. And so you need to contact them and get in enough time for you to be considered as part of that internal application procedure, because a lot of these fellowships have limitations for how many a university can put forward. Okay, so the final slide is about how you can prepare yourself for applying for one of these roles. I'd say that either to be for a lectureship or to apply for a research fellowship. I guess these are all fairly obvious, but publishing in reputable journals is really helpful. In the UK, you're usually entering a university and you're going to have some research, but also some teaching experience. And so having demonstrated that you can teach or have an interest in teaching is really helpful. There's also a lot of emphasis on collaboration with industry. A fair amount of our grant funding requires or encourages industrial collaboration, so evidence of that is really valuable. Evidence of being able to work collaboratively, there's a lot of encouragement for you to be able to support each other within the academic environment. Experience of applying for funding, I think Eva mentioned that as well, but certainly even just having got travel grants or having applied for time at a synchrotron, if you can cost that in and say you were involved or you led that, that's a really good thing to have on your CV. One of the common questions that we get asked, or that we ask at interview, would be, do you know what funding you'd apply for? So having researched what UK funding you'd be eligible for if you were to get the role, that's a really important thing to have done. Certainly knowing the institution that you're applying to is really helpful so that you can consider who you might be able to work with. You need to have a sensible research plan. That may or may not be part of the application procedure. For a fellowship, that's absolutely key. But for a lectureship too, you should have a good idea of what you might be working on. And as I say, try and get in touch with academic universities. And if you can build links, like Eva said early, then that's really, really helpful. Thank you.
Great, Sarah, thank you so much. So I think that now we can start with some questions. We've received quite a few already, but I'm just gonna get it started while I review some of these by asking each of Eva, the speaker, and our panelists, why did you choose to become a professor? And especially if you transitioned from other realms, what actually led you to this decision? And I guess, was it worth it?
So I'll start. I'm not a professor yet. I'm in kind of two different pre-professor emeriting systems, just applying to actually become a so-called Sonder or special professor, however you want to call it, in Germany. So the reason I took this career path is that I've, since high school, been passionate about teaching. So initially, really deciding to go into this direction was a lot about my passion for teaching and scientific communication. And I also really enjoy science and scientific discovery. So yeah.
Sounds reasonable to me.
Okay, in my case, I was passionate for science at very, very early stages. I mean, when I was something like 16, 17, and I already decided I wanted to be a scientist at that times. But of course, I didn't know what options were available. So I did my studies in physics, and then I joined a group on material science, and I did my PhD. And I see that in the case of Spain, most of the options to become a scientist are related to teaching at the university. So this was really the decision. So in my case, I was fascinated by science, and then I discovered that to have a position in science, one of the options is to be a professor. So then I discovered that I also passionate in teaching young scientists. So, well, that's the reason in my case.
So I guess it's a bit different. I mean, I have found that I really enjoy teaching, and one of the great things about being a professor is all the cool people you get to interact with. You know, all the students are different and they all inspire you in different ways. And I also have colleagues who are, you know, incredibly smart and incredibly fun to work with. But the reason that I chose to be an academic was because I wanted my own microscope. And I worked for a manufacturer, Joel, and I was selling these amazing microscopes or giving them training and demonstrating these instruments, and I had to give them to the people and go away and work on the next one. And I wanted my own one to do stuff, you know, all kinds of things I wanted to do with a microscope. And I didn't have time in the time I was given on somebody else's microscope. So I had to become an academic because these things are quite expensive and I don't have room in my garage. So yeah, I had to have a lab in the university.
Yeah, it makes sense to me as well. I always said I wanted to become a physicist because they get to play with the coolest toys. Okay. So we have a question that actually a lot of people have upvoted here. I believe this is related to when Miguel was talking. You mentioned that a good place to target would be to have 15 first author papers, or 15 papers, but the question is, does this mean 15 first author papers or just to be co-authored on 15 papers? So it's kind of a question of,
I mean,
how are these things weighted?
Oh,
for
of
the
course, this is
application?
a very general number. I mean, it's not something that you need to be sure that you will get the position. I was talking in this moment about the Juan de la Cierva positions. And in this particular case, we have some people who has applied recently, people working with me or people joining my team. And what I have seen is that in this particular case, I mean, and this is very specific, it's not something you can apply for other position in Spain, or probably it's not something you can apply for a position in Sweden. So later, maybe Eva can comment on that. But in this case, it's very competitive, and 15 papers, it is much better if you are the first author. If you have 15 papers, being the first author, and the quality of the papers is good enough, I mean, you are in a Q1 journal, in every paper, you will have a lot of possibilities. Of course, if you are the third author in 10 papers of these 15, it will be much more difficult, because you are not demonstrating that you are doing the job. Maybe you are cooperating, and your cooperation is not so clear. You are the third author. Maybe the people evaluating will say, okay, this guy has very good contacts, is working in a good team, but it's not clear that he or she is doing the job, the difficult job. I mean, the experiments, it is material science, or the concept we are talking about mathematics or other things. Huh? But I want to say again that this is for this specific call. But of course, as many papers as you have, and currently in the last few years, I have seen that the quality of the papers is becoming more and more important. I mean, in 10 years ago, maybe the numbers were, okay, 10 is more than 8, 10 is more than 5, but maybe now 5 with very high impact factor, maybe 6, 7 impact factor, maybe this is more than 10 with low impact factor. So it's not only about numbers, but I was just saying that a number to
target.
Yeah, kind of target. Thank you.
Yeah. There's always a question of metrics when you're thinking of applying to positions like this, where it's never particularly clear if your package is sufficient. So, yeah.
I think you should have a go, even if it isn't, you might get some feedback. So, and I think it massively depends on the discipline. So the nanotechnology and more chemistry, maybe expect to have more papers with more authors in higher impact journals. But metallurgy, if you've got 1 or 2 solid acta materia papers, then that's really good, So I do think it's commensurate with the discipline and the experience that you have, and that it's worth having a go. But I don't think any job adverts ever say you must have a minimum of, in terms of
course.
papers. Maybe it does for the application processes that you're mentioning, but
Catherine, if I can just jump in here for a second with the procedural thing. We're getting a lot of questions in the chat room. I'd just like to remind our audience once again to please use the Q&A function. You'll find that at the bottom of the webinar player to enter your questions. It's a little, our panelists just can't monitor the Q&A and the chat at the same time and respond to your questions. So it really helps us out a lot if you use that Q&A functionality. Thanks. Sorry to interrupt.
Great. Yep. Yes, I am only looking at the Q&A panel. Okay.
Could I comment on the latter?
Yes.
So I think it was very important that what has already been said about, the amount and which papers. So keep in mind, the people, or when you apply for a position, what they're trying to gauge from your application is whether you have the ability or the potential to become a future leader in research. So that means and then, for instance, this maybe having a lot of papers, but always being in the middle of the author list might actually show you're a highly valuable colleague. You're always somebody that everybody can rely on. You probably do something very important. But you might not necessarily be somebody that is generous ideas and that is completion. So in this case, I would really say I mean, think also about, I mean, there's different academic pathways and careers, but think about what would actually suit you. You, of course, do not have to become a professor to stay involved in science, and there might be jobs that would be much more enjoyable than having to be the one that just constantly applies for funding, right? And it's so I sometimes really feel, well, you know, use your publication list to also understand a bit who you are as a scientist and where you feel you would fit best, and then go for those kind of positions where you would really fit best and be also happiest and most productive.
Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next question now. We have a couple of questions related to, female faculty. And so one of the questions is, why is the ratio of senior female faculty so much lower than junior faculty? What is the limitation here? And then as a follow-up to that, is there any assimilated information available on faculty positions in universities looking to address the gender inequality problem with respect to women in academia, for instance, through giving preference to women candidates? They, you know, yeah, I guess.
It's such a complex question, right? Yeah.
Eva, I can answer it from the UK. We have something called this Athena Swan Awards, which requires universities to look at diversity and to understand where bottlenecks are happening and try to put actions in place to remove those barriers. And if those are barriers around dealing with balancing childcare, or they're barriers around meetings that happen after hours, or you know, whatever issues they are at a particular institution, that we are trying to address them. And I think, I mean, some of it historically is that, you know, we haven't been that great at getting women or giving women the expectations that they can become academics. I think it's improving, but it takes time, yeah, to get up to the senior academic positions. So I think that we are improving, and the fact that Eva talked about 50% academic females in the lower levels, we aren't quite there in the UK yet, but that, you know, that's fantastic, and that shows that things are going in the right direction. But it takes time, you know, to get up, like you say, 30 years to get to be the senior potentially. So I think that's where it's going, and certainly there is a lot of effort going in. All of the job adverts that you'll see will have a positive diversity statement. I don't believe that anyone would, there aren't places where you say we must have a female professor for this role, but at least not in the UK. That isn't something that we do, but it's looked on as part of the package.
Yeah, I think it's changing little by little, and we will see the results in many years' time, because it takes time, but it's changing for sure. And here we see that the number of postdoc and also the number of assistant professors are right now, maybe we have 50% of females, and maybe 10 years ago it was not the case. So of course these females will little by little become good professors, but we'll see they need time, of course. And of course, also another point is that maybe in scientific careers and in a physics faculty, the number of females is lower, even in the graduate classes, at least here in our faculty. In physics, of course, maybe chemistry is completely different, or engineering probably is the same that physics, at least here in Spain.
So I would like to, to mention or say, I think there's actually many programs in Germany, also in Sweden or in European countries, where you'd say there's even programs that really try to recruit female applicants specifically through those programs. As an example, the Helmholtz Association has a first-term appointment type of program for especially female researchers, and they also have a program to recruit excellent international female researchers. And they do not have that equivalent for men. So there's in particular research organization university, they're really trying to bring in, I would really call it more or extra female researchers into the system. And that's because, of course, there is a history. So until the current generation of junior researchers become professors, that will take a couple of years. So I would also say there's a lot, and there's so from also my observation, knowing men in my position, I'd say I've had more opportunities and I've been given more opportunities. And then sometimes we have debated whether this is fair or not. Then I would say, though, you still need to fulfill a certain level of excellence in order to then turn these opportunities into a success story. So I would also, strongly reject sometimes the notion that when men kind of approach us and say like, yeah, for you women, it's so much easier. I kind of feel, well, as a woman, you get more opportunities, but it also means you're being evaluated more. And you also have to constantly prove that you're actually getting a position because you're competent and not just because of some quota. So that's a bit on the cheeky side, but in my own experience, I'd say there's so many fantastic and excellent female academics that I really say, well, I am looking also, for instance, to recruit female postdocs, but I've noticed it's actually very hard because fortunately women tend to get the opportunity to access the next career stage actually earlier than men I know in that exact same group, or that's at least in my field where I found I'm rarely finding as qualified female candidates for postdoc positions. For PhD, it's equal number. For postdocs, it's hard, and I think it's maybe a good sign that they enter more senior positions earlier.
Sure. Okay. So I have a question about the, actually a couple of you mentioned that there's a fixed number of positions in your respective countries for faculty, and that many people, Miguel, you specifically mentioned that many people are getting towards retirement age, and so you think that more positions will be opening up. Is there a problem with this? I mean, it seems like it would create sort of waves in hiring that don't enable a continuous set of young applicants or infusion of new ideas into the pipeline. Is there any kind of policies or something that people are trying to initiate in order to sort of even this out a bit more?
Mm-hmm. Well, very difficult question, because this is, let's say, politics of science, and this is out of our control, of course. But at least in our country, I see that these waves are taking place constantly. I mean, there are some times where there are many positions available, and then there are maybe 10 years that the number of positions is very, very small. This has happened previously, and I think will happen again, because of the current system, in which when you get a permanent position, you stay there for a long time, and of course there is no way to fire you, I would say, or it's very difficult, at least. So you fill the number of positions in a given time, then for a long time the number of positions will be very small. So now in Spain we will have a time where, for maybe the next 10 years, with a lot of opportunities, and probably after that the number of opportunities will decrease. Let's see. I mean, politicians can change this if they change the system. But if the system remain, this will happen.
Anybody else?
Maybe this is very specific of Spain because of the system. I don't know. But in our case, it's like this.
Is it true though? Because I mean, my understanding is it's quite similar, actually, from the people I know in many different regions within Europe. It seems to be the case. There's a fixed number of positions. Position opens, it gets filled, and then and then it's filled until
for 20 years.
Yeah,
that's the problem.
Well, let me comment on that, because actually in Sweden it's this is not the case, and I've kind of, in a way you could say like, yeah, that's great, right? Once you can, it's more easy to get into the academic system, and then once you have a position, almost bound to be promoted. But the backside with this can really become that there's departments there where there's a predominant number of professors without postdocs or PhD students unless they get third-party funding. So, you know, the funding, or also the necessity for institutional funding, might not increase. So this means when you increase the amount of permanent position, they need to get the salary, and then there will be less funding available for other academic staff, for PhD students or for postdocs. And I would say that can also lead to an imbalance, that you kind of get this overblown academic system where in the end, I mean, you might have these amazingly highly skilled researchers that are essentially professors, but they are by themselves in the lab every day. And that is amazing. That's really cool. I really enjoy that, because the scientific level is super high because of it. But at the same time, you can also sense there's huge internal competition for the little funding that's available. So yeah, so I sometimes feel, if you consider the professor being an academic position for teaching, if the number of students does not exponentially increase, there's maybe not a need to recruit more and more and more professors to teach the students that are there. So in a way, I also think it seems almost sound and healthy to say the number of professors, maybe it shouldn't be fixed, but it should definitely have some kind of relation to the teaching requirements for undergraduate teaching at that university. And yeah, and then of course, if there's professors, for instance, that are only doing research, maybe that's a bit separate. So I don't know if that's a good answer, but yeah.
I think that's fair, isn't it? It's a balance between the available funding for teaching and research, and the teaching funding comes from students, and that's what limits the number of professors. And I think you're right that the number of new people in polymers, for example, if you've got a large number of academics who are working in polymers at a particular university, then you probably, they're all right for research and teaching in polymers at that university, and it has to be, you look at somewhere else. So, which maybe doesn't have such a strong area in polymers, for example, if your area is polymers. So I think it is about looking at where, like you say, where there's a need. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I'd say that as people get to be more senior, if they aren't any more research active, then they get kind of sidelines, and then space becomes available. So I'd say that was a good thing, I guess.
Yeah, maybe it also leads to a certain predictability, right? So if you kind of sense, I can see how in about 5 years from now, a lot of senior professors in my field in my country are going to retire. Or at a certain university, there's 2 or 3 people even retiring, and I would be the perfect fit to fill that position. You could probably quite strategically try to gauge if that would be a possibility.
Sure. Okay, thank you guys. I'm gonna move on to another question now. There's lots of questions about international candidates. So for instance, do international candidates stand a chance for applying to teaching-oriented positions? As a follow-up to that, what are the criteria for selection for teaching-oriented positions versus research-oriented ones?
I mean, I think that ties in with the comments before, which is that if you've got 20 Nature papers, then I should apply for the research-orientated positions. Whereas if you're more balanced and you have done some teaching, you enjoy interacting with students, and you've only got a handful of papers, then maybe apply for the more teaching-focused ones.
Yes.
Okay. So one person asks specifically, if you do a postdoc in the UK, can you negotiate to get a permanent position afterwards? So, and I think maybe we can answer this as in not just the UK, like what are the odds of negotiating a permanent position if you move to a country or are from that country and are doing a postdoc at an institution?
Or at least in the UK, for a postdoc, very small. If you were bringing an ERC starter grant, then much higher. So if you've attracted funding, then you're in a potentially strong position, but it's very, very rare as a postdoc. I don't think I've ever heard of it.
The same here. If you have a postdoc, it's not possible to negotiate anything with the university, basically. If you have a starting grant or Marie Curie or something that is very difficult to get, so you are proving that you are very special, let's say, you have very good standards, then you have more options to start negotiating an assistant professor position, maybe. Not the permanent, for sure the permanent will be almost impossible from the very beginning.
Yeah.
But if you enter as an assistant professor, then the possibilities to become associate professor in a short time are very high. So then, yeah, if you have this kind of special grants coming from the European Union, well, the options are much higher.
Yeah, so I'd say you can't really negotiate as a postdoc. So by default, the postdoc is also usually supposed to be a kind of a limited time where people go, and usually they also go somewhere else to experience a different research environment. So in the past, the postdoc was classically, you go from your home country abroad and then come back. So basically experience something else, come back, and then start an academic career. So the kind of going from one postdoc to maybe an extension of that, unless it really is a tenure track or a career building position, you have to really think about it. I know many people, and myself as well. I mean, I've officially been in 2 different postdocs, and in all places where I was, there's limitations for how long you can be a postdoc. But then in Sweden, they say, well, we have this tricks. We put you on a postdoc on a stipend for 2 years, and then we put you on a postdoc that's a real postdoc for 2 years, and then we move you to researcher for 2 years. And I mean, when I kind of heard this, I feel like, yeah, but that's not what I want. I want a tenure track position. So I think it's actually maybe, if you want to go this path, it's not easy. So I would really encourage you, articulate very clearly what you're looking for. So when you are at a place where you feel I am looking for possibilities to advance my career and become a group leader or professor one day, really try and start talking to the people that can at least advise you on whether or not this is possible. And to honestly also to manage your own expectations. So you should be very careful to not wait and see what happens, but very proactively try to find opportunities. And for myself, that meant I've been commuting between 2 countries for 4 years. It's been extremely stressful. But it was because I felt I'm way too impatient to wait and see what happens. I basically want to do something and want to do more and actually want to do research and go to a place where I can work on scientific questions that I'm interested in, and not sit and wait. Yeah, it's frustrating. I know that it's a really frustrating time.
Yeah.
Yes, it's that limbo, that time in limbo where you have to be both productive and trying to move beyond. Yeah. Okay, so where did it go? There were a couple of questions related to, I guess it's sort of related to networking in my view, but there are questions like, how do you know, or how do you find the professors that are either open for fellowships or open for these types of collaborative efforts where, like Miguel, you mentioned that you have to know, or you have to be partnered already with a professor when you apply for certain funding tools. So how do you find these people?
It's another good question. Yeah, I mean, there are different options, of course. I mean, there was the question here is, you want to stay in your topic. You are doing, for instance, a postdoc in polymer science, and you want to stay in your topic. then I think it's not difficult to identify the research teams working on polymers in Europe. I mean, this is today something simple to identify. And also you go to conferences, you maybe have the opportunity to meet these people in person, these groups in person. So the networking has to be started before you apply. I mean, you want to apply for a position in Spain, for instance, you need to know the groups well in advance. So you need to go to the websites of these groups, maybe contact them, in conferences, and then offer the possibility of joining that group in the future. And then the group, maybe they will help you with the application. Of course, some people try to contact me that is interested in working in FOMS, and or he has a good CV. I will support him or her to apply for a position here in my group. So the networking has to be, my suggestion is, if you want to join a group in Germany or in Sweden or in Spain or in UK, you have to contact the group well in advance to announce that you are interested. And then if they are looking for people, they will find a way to help you. Of course, if they are not looking for people, or they have 20 people waiting, maybe you are not in the right time, and it will be very difficult for you. But if they are looking for people, probably they will help, and they will try to help you, and they will find a way.
I mean, so the more enthusiastic support you can get from wherever you're trying to establish yourself, the better. So if there's really a need, so I don't know, there's senior people even saying we really need that person to come and bring in their expertise into our environment, you're going to get a lot of support. I mean, they're going to help you even, read the grants you're writing, read your application, give you feedback, really help you make that better and better. And I remember, so what was so compelling to me is when I applied to Helmholtz Center the first time, was actually someone who was fairly up in the hierarchy, who took his time to actually read my application, because he was really keen to recruit somebody with my background to the research institute. And I've never gotten better feedback, where you really felt was critical, helpful, but also really, make sure it's the best possible. And you sometimes, and maybe to kind of tell you a bit from the other side, so what you want to make sure of is when you apply somewhere that your application doesn't read generic, I'm looking for a position. So you want to really convince someone on the other side, if they might have never heard of you, but you're actually the person that they need. they need to recruit you in order to forward their academic environment.
But how do you, I guess the question is more, how do you know what these people want or what they're looking for, or whatever? I mean, to me, it's all about networking. It's about knowing what people are doing and what they're interested in, and where you fit in within that realm.
It's exactly that.
Yeah, you need to do some research. I mean, you need to do research on what is the people doing and what is the people needing, and the research groups to have information to be sure who should contact. What is it?
Did this paper, I think I could do some follow-up work on this material, which would be even better. And I think you can get existing supporters like your PhD supervisor, your current postdoc supervisor, to reach out and say, I've got this fantastic postdoc who I think would be a really good fit. And that's even stronger. If you have somebody, and especially if they know each other in some vague manner. I think an email from a professor in the US saying, I've got this amazing postdoc, they'd like to apply for a Royal Society Fellowship at Manchester, is going to get your attention an awful lot more, even than that same person sending you a fellowship application. Just because that's so if you can get that, that's fantastic. They won't always be possible.
Helps to know people, to have connections.
If the people you're working for support you, then that says something about what you're doing at the moment, I guess.
Well, I mean, I think that even material science is very wide, and there are many topics, etc. But we are not so many people working on this topic, so it's not so difficult to know who is doing what today using, of course, the internet. But So if any of the people here is interested in, I don't know, nanocomposites containing graphene, and I think in a few hours you will identify who are the groups, top groups working on that. And then it's a question of looking how to contact them directly, indirectly through your supervisor, current supervisor, or to other collaborators you have. So that's the strategy you need to contact them is something has to be analyzed in any case. But I think most of us will be happy to help people that are interested in joining our groups. Or if we see that this is not the right person, maybe we will say, okay, you are not the right person for my group, but please contact this colleague that I have, and they are looking for people like you. So you need to be active, active in looking for positions that maybe they are not in any place. The position is not announced, but there is a position there that you don't know, or this position can be created for you if you are the right person. So you need to be proactive on this, not waiting until a position appears, but trying to convince the other guy, the supervisor of that group, that the position is there is the need for that position, and you are the right person to occupy that.
Yeah, I think that's a point where in some countries, I think that's not allowed to happen. So my understanding in Germany is that all positions must be posted publicly if they're publicly
of course,
funded.
Later, yeah, you're right. Later, you have to. In my case, I will need to open a. Let's say there is a position. It is necessary to open a open call.
Yeah.
But of course, in this open call, the person who has more information has more opportunities.
Yeah, and this is actually where it becomes really tricky, because I mean, I'm all for transparency, but when you're in this position where you're looking for a position and there's not many available, and you keep applying and applying, and you keep applying for positions that are openly announced, but where there's an internal candidate, it means you're wasting time. So whenever there's a position that I'm interested in, I actually give the contact person a call and say, hey, is this person, I mean, I'm this and that, explain briefly, I looked at the position. Is this something where you're looking? I sometimes even ask directly, do you already have an internal candidate? So I one time also, for instance, when I was given the opportunity to apply for a assistant professor position in Sweden, the same thing, they announced the position, although the position was only created because I brought in my own funding that would fund my own research. And then I said, yeah, but if you announce it, honestly, if there would be somebody better suited, I would want them to succeed, because that would be fair. But they can't get my funding because that was awarded in my name. So how do you solve this dilemma? It's kind of, so I'm very, I don't like the fake open calls. I'm sorry. I think it's not transparent either. It's a waste of time for people to apply to positions that aren't available. Yeah.
Yeah, right. I haven't seen that in the UK. If you come with your own funding in that position, the position will be generated based on your funding, and you wouldn't have to advertise because it's your. You don't have to advertise.
Also in Spain, you came here with a starting grant. There is no need to open a position or competition between people.
Yeah.
Okay. Move on to the next question. Apart from, like, I guess that it says hard skills, but I guess this means typical things like, okay, number of publications, or like kind of the obvious things, and actually, yeah, your skill set. What are some other more soft skills that, or just other kind of less thought of skills that you tend to expect from candidates? Or what's something that can send it over the top?
Programming. So We have people that come with really, really strong academic expertise, but then they're also really brilliant programmers. That's what I'm looking for right now, because so much of honestly, so much of academic research and data acquisition has to become automized. So I really realize it's a skill that I didn't learn. I can't teach either, so I really constantly feel, yeah, that's useful in material science, and I think also other disciplines.
But also at the level of faculty.
Yeah.
I mean, definitely I can see that
Maybe
at the synchrotron, right? But yeah.
You're right. No, so level of the faculty, I would say here, I think it's important to show that people are engaged beyond just their academic profile. So, and then honestly, it's anything. It's these kind of softer things like I've participated in outreach. I don't know, have started a project with high school students, or I have a podcast about, I don't know, a certain academic topic that I broadcast. So this kind of engagement, the one to communicate, the one to engage with community and other researchers, I think is very, very important when you are becoming a leader in academia. And it's often, I mean, I don't know, I think it's often showing that you're doing the little bit more, right? You're not just going to work to do your job, but you're doing the little bit extra. And that could be different things.
Mm. Does anybody else have any other suggestions?
No, I think that's great. If you volunteered, you've done some things beyond what was effectively your job. You know, you've applied for some money, you've initiated a new project in schools, you've, I don't know, started interacting with a startup, anything that wasn't definitely what you were supposed to be doing is great, because it shows you have, you know, innovation, get up and go.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think we have time for just maybe one final question here before we're up. And there, actually, I only saw one question related to the present situation with COVID-19, but I'll sort of expand on it a little bit. How have the sort of recruitment aspects changed, or how has the application and interview process changed as a result of COVID-19? And do you expect that to continue in the future once we're past this stage?
I'd say that if you're really good at teaching blended learning, you're in a really competitive position right now. So if you can show that you can teach a blended learning course, then I think lots of places are going to be very interested.
What about for the application and
so in our case, I think, well, go ahead, Eva.
You mean the application for positions right now in the current situation?
Yeah,
because you
I see a lot.
Yeah.
Shall I go?
Sorry?
Okay. So yeah. So I think one thing I've noticed, at least in the U.S., is that there's a lot of hiring freezes, right? I think that's not the case so much in Europe, but there are other things that can be affected. The way that the application process actually goes, or the way that the interview process goes. So you see that now, you know, you're not flying out to some location to go interview, you'll be interviewing like this, you know? And I feel like there are benefits to that, and there's also negative aspects of that. And I'm wondering if you guys have any insight on that.
So I can see, I mean, we've always interviewed online, and not for everybody though. Some people who can get there would come in person, and then if you are coming a very long way and it's too expensive, then we wouldn't interview online. And now everybody is online, so actually if you're not able to come, it's probably a more even playing field. You know, it's hard to be, you know, comparing somebody on Skype to somebody who's really there in the room. So perhaps that's a good thing.
Yeah, well, in our case, I think things didn't change too much. because most of the applications are already online, and also when we are dealing with positions with an interview, is done online. But in many cases, everything is done online before this pandemic, so this didn't change too much. But of course, everything is going in slowly right now. That's also something that is happening. I mean, positions are let's say, postponed for some time because of this. So hopefully we will go to something similar to previous situations soon.
And then also, so right now, of course, there's some restrictions. So even when you try to get visa, right, there is not, sometimes you can't apply for visa to go to certain countries abroad. For instance, at Helmholtz Center, I was told this week, we are not yet accepting any people from abroad. And I mean, until further notice. So they basically said, I can't even tell you when you would be able to, recruit somebody that actually comes from abroad. Especially guests, for instance, guest scientists are just, well, that's out of the question. So it's a little bit unsettling because, of course, we can't really plan for it. And I think it would also be negative if this leads to that we go to more local recruitment, because I think that would be detrimental to the internationalization process if only those who can actually make it to the interview on site get to interview, or, transition, or, I don't know. So it's tricky right now, I think, for most of us. Yeah.
We're all in the same boat, I guess.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, well, I think that's about all we have time for today. So I just want to thank Eva, our main speaker, for joining us today. Also, Sarah and Miguel, thank you for joining as panelists.
Okay.
I think this discussion was quite informative. Also, I want to thank all of the people who are working behind the scenes at the MRS for all of their hard work and support in making this seminar a success. And also thank you to the audience for participating today in the webinar. So this webinar was organized by the Early Career Professionals Subcommittee of the MRS. And now I will turn it back over to Bob Brockler to wrap things up.
Thank you, Katherine, and thank you to our panelists and our attendees as well. Our moderator today was Katherine Mazzio of Helmholtz-Zentrum Berlin. My name is Bob Brockler. I'm the Digital Media Manager in the Materials Research Society. Just want to remind you that this is part one of a three-part series. Today we focused on the academic market in Europe. Part two is on the academic market in the US. And then part three is on the academic market for primarily undergraduate institutions. And we want to remind you that this webinar was developed by the Early Career Professionals Subcommittee of the Materials Research Society. They do great work for us. If you'd like to find out more about that committee, please find them on the mrs.org website. And also, we want to invite you to any of our upcoming MRS On Demand webinars. You can find a full list of all the upcoming webinars at mrs.org/webinars.